I just sat in complete shock. But I was hoping against hope that he'd be alive somewhere that he was, you know, he was going to pull through this, that this was going to be his wake-up call. And I went back up into his room, and then I seen a suicide note. So I knew then that he had left the house with the intention of killing himself. My son, Lee Barry, he was born in the 1995, totally normal, healthy baby, always full of fun, always laughing, loads of friends. Me and him were very, very, very close, brought him up as a single parent. He was always very open with me, no matter what went on. He always told me what he was doing and where he was going. When he got a phone, like, he would text me constantly and say, like, don't worry about my mum, I'm in such and such's house or whatever. But the first experience of him taking drugs was when he was 12. I had went out of the house and forgot something to come back to the house, and he was standing out the back smoking dope. So that was my first experience catching Lee with that. So my immediate reaction was, I need to get this stopped. And I took him to the police station. And I told the policeman what had happened. And I says, you may have a word with him. I says, because I don't want this escalating. And so the policeman took him in, and he phoned me an hour later, and he says, could you come back down for Lee? And I come back down to the police station. And Lee was in tears, absolute tears. And the policeman, like, kind of winked at me and said, I think we have him sorted. He says, don't think you'll be seeing him doing any more drugs. So I was happy enough with that, and I had said to Lee, I hope you realise this is for your own good, son. I haven't done this with any malice or just to make you feel humiliated or anything. I says, I need you to know that this is what will happen if you're found taking drugs again. I says, you will be marched back to the police station. Hard and all as it might have sounded, but that was my way of dealing with it. So he was grand then for a couple of years. Then when he was about 14, he came in one night, and I just noticed something different about him. His mannerism, his eyes were like really, really big. And he was just like talking like a washing machine. He was just and I said to him, you okay? But then he started to shake, and I says, Lee, what's wrong with you? And he says, Mum, somebody gave me a tablet and I don't know what it is. He says, but I'm really scared. So I phoned the hospital, who advised me that to let him go to bed, but to sit with him and make sure that his breathing doesn't get worse, that it doesn't get shallow, and if it does, to phone for an ambulance. So I put Lee up into his bed, and he was shaking and he was sweating, and I said to him, look, I'm going to sit with you here all night. So I says, just you drift off to sleep, everything will be okay. It's a really scary situation to be in. So I sat with him the whole night, right through to the next morning. And when he woke up, I said to him, Lee, what have you done? What did you take? He says, I don't know. This man just gave me a tablet. He says, and I don't even know who he was, or I just took it. So Lee at that point had been involved in football, with the Alarm Youth football team, and he was a really, really good player. So I says to him, Lee, if you continue like this, I said, and do this, you're going to lose everything. And I says, your football and career and everything, you're so good at it. So once again, he said, yeah, I'm really sorry, Mum, I won't do it, I promise. 16 years of age, he went to Belsonic, as they do, and I just said to him, Lee, please promise me before you go out anywhere tonight, do not get involved in any form of drugs. If anybody's taking any drugs around you, just walk away. But the same thing again, he came back in that night, shaking, sweating, eyes bulging out of his head again. So for me, that was kind of the start of it, where it was going to become a regular thing for Lee, and no matter what I said or done, all he kept saying was, I promise I'll never ever do it again, Mum, I promise, that's it. He says, I know it's not worth it, it's not worth it. So when Lee was 16, he was diagnosed with a very rare condition called VHL, which is a form of cancer. His father had passed away from it. So Lee was then told by the doctors he could no longer play football because it was a contact sport, and he had 3 tumours in his brain. So that there for Lee was a big major thing, him having to give up football. So to take place of the football, he decided he would start to do, well, DJing. Music was his second passion after football. So yeah, he bought his first set of decks for £100. Sat and played upstairs. The music was great. Me and him used to sit and play it and listen to it and annoy the neighbours very badly. But 8 months after he started DJing, he entered a competition in Thompson's in Belfast, and he won it. And he'd only been DJing 8 months, and from that his career in DJing just completely escalated. Lee never ever really gave himself credit for what he could do. He was very hard on himself. He used to say, "I'm not that good at it, I'm not." And I said, "Lee, you really are," because he had a really big following, especially all his friends. And I went with him, and you know, my friends went with him. He got his first gig in Lush. He became resident in Lush. He DJ'd in Ibiza, Croatia, Australia. And he was just so good at it. But I kind of then thought, this is the scene where this is going to test him. Is he going to be able to stay off drugs while he's doing this? Which turned out to be no, he couldn't. It was just the scene he was in. And not only that, in Larne as well, he told me himself, everybody does it. And I'm like, Lee, but everybody doesn't do it, son, and that doesn't mean you have to do it. It says, this means that you should be the stronger person. You just say no and walk away. But because it was such a big, apparently normal thing to do, it then went on to cocaine. So yeah, pretty much coming in regularly with cocaine, and his whole personality changed. He really did. He just looked different. He spoke different. His mannerisms were completely different. So he came in to me one day and he says, "Mum, I've had enough of this." And I says, that's good. He was about 20, I suppose, 21. He says, "I have to get out of here. I need to get out of this town to get away from this." And I says, "Right, okay, well, where are you planning on going?" And he says, "I'm going to Australia in 6 weeks." He had it all booked. So him and his friend went to India and Thailand, and then he went to Australia, and I was absolutely delighted. And everybody said to me, "Oh my goodness, you must miss him." I says, "I do, miss him terribly. We FaceTime often," I says, "but I don't want him to ever come back here." Because watching him in Australia and how much fun he was having and the amount of people he'd made friends with, that's how he got DJing in Australia. It just made me so happy. I thought, oh my goodness, I've got Lee back. He was just back to the way he was. And I always said to him, you know, once I get the money gathered up, I'll come out and you can get me a wee granny flat and all. And he says, "Oh, aye, definitely, Mum, no problem." But he had been there 9 months, and come the Christmas, he was feeling a bit lonely. And he FaceTimed me, he says, "Mum, I'm struggling at the minute. I would really love to come home." He says, "But just for a holiday." And I says, "Are you sure?" I says, "Because if you come home," and I says, "what if you get involved again in drugs?" I says, "I couldn't cope with that, Lee." I says, "Because it's draining me, son." And I says, "The last few years have completely and utterly drained me. Never sleeping a wink every time I went out the door." And he says, no, it's just for 2 weeks, I promise." And so he booked his flight, he come home, he was absolutely buzzing to be home and seeing me and seeing his nana and all the family and his friends. But then 2 days, he said to me, "I don't even know why I bother coming back." He says, "This is really crap." The weather was bad, like they had left Australia where the weather was just gorgeous. And I said to him, "I'm so glad you're saying that, because I know then that you will go back in 2 weeks." He had interviews for jobs set up in Australia as soon as he went back. And so the 2 weeks when it came, that really bad weather came where all the airports shut for weeks and there was no public transport or anything. So he couldn't get away. And so it was another 4 weeks before I was able to get my flight back to Australia, but that time he was back on drugs again. I knew taking him to the airport and him going up that stairs to that plane, he did not want to go. But I didn't say anything, I just thought, no, you just go, and perhaps when you get there you'll realise it's the best thing for you. But he pretty much spent the last 4 weeks on drugs, coming in the house all hours, sometimes not seeing him for 2 or 3 days at a time. Just coming in, and it was just pathetic, it really was. So he got to Australia and he literally landed. And he rang me and he says, "I can't do this." He says, "Lee, you've literally only landed at the airport." I says, "Like, you don't know yet, you need to try." So he went and stayed in the hostel for one night and phoned me the next day. And he says, Mum, please let me come home. I can't do this anymore. And I says, okay. I says, if that's what you really want, I said, you need to realise, Lee, you have to change when you come home. You can't go back to these people and these drugs again. And promises, yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what I'll do. I'll come back and I'll get a job. And back he came, and pretty much within weeks, he got himself a job and all, got a new car, but he was back on the drugs. And suffered badly with mental health as well. A few things that happened throughout his life that, you know, was detrimental to his mental health. But I was the only one that ever seen that part of Lee. Nobody knew what he was going through. Many nights I sat with him as he cried. Don't want to be here anymore, what's the point? And I says to him, we need to get you help. So our first port of call at that time, I mean, I hadn't got a clue, not a clue what help was out there, if any. So the first port of call was the doctors, which he willingly went to. The doctor said he would refer him to a counsellor. There was an 8-week waiting list. So during that 8 weeks, his mental health was getting worse, and he was still drug taking. So he eventually got an appointment with a counsellor. After 2 sessions, the counsellor says there was no point in going to sessions anymore. He wasn't a drug addict, he was just a drug abuser, which I found completely and utterly bizarre. You know what I mean? If he's a drug abuser, he'll turn into an addict at some point. But that was her answer to that. So I thought, right, well, where do we go now? I hadn't got a clue. So one night in the house, he said again, I don't know why I'm here. I'm absolutely useless. I keep disappointing you. I keep letting you down. And he said, I hate doing it. I hate myself. So I said to him, sorry.
Take your time. You're doing really well.
I said to him, Lee, you'll never be a disappointment to me, son. I says, everything you've ever done and achieved in your life and getting through this illness, everything, your football, your DJing career, I says, I am so proud of you. And I told him that all the time. I never ever made him feel anything but, you know, he should be so proud of himself for what he's done. So I says to him, okay, well, we'll phone Lifeline, because that was the only kind of thing I knew at that time of anybody to phone. So he phoned Lifeline and he said, would you sit with me? And I said, yeah, and I sat with him, put it on loudspeaker, and he told Lifeline how he was feeling and why he was feeling the way, and he was taking drugs and he didn't want to be that person, but he didn't know where to go for help, and now he was just feeling suicidal. And he said my doctor had already referred me to a counsellor, and as soon as he said that, Lifeline says, well, we can't help you then. And I says to her, what do you mean you can't help him? She says, if he's already been referred to a counsellor, we can't refer him to another counsellor. And I says, but he's sitting here telling you he's going to kill himself. I says, what am I supposed to do? And she says, I'm really sorry, my hands are tied, but that's just the way it is. Come off the phone, and I just sat and I held him. And I just says, Lee, we'll get through this. We'll get through this together. So that was kind of, me and him just decided we would just have to try and do all we could between, you know, to stay off them. And he actually did. He had spurts of staying off them for 6 weeks, but he could never, ever, ever get off past 6 weeks. Don't know what it was. But every time he was off them, he looked so well, and he you know, he went and got his hair cut and his beard trimmed, and he started to dress nice again. And he would say to me, oh, I feel really good. He says, that's it, I'm not taking drugs anymore. He says, I feel absolutely amazing. And I says, well, yeah. I says, good, that's a great sign. So me and him started to go out walks with the dog and just do things, go out for something to eat, go for a cup of coffee. Come the 6 weeks, and I just knew at the minute he said to me on a Friday when he came in from work, I'm going to such and such's house for a cup of tea, I just thought, no, here we go. I says, Lee, please promise me you won't take drugs. And he says, no, honestly, I'm just going for a cup of tea, play a few games. Never seen him till Monday then. He would text me constantly, I would phone him constantly, just saying, Lee, where are you? Are you coming home? And he would always say, yeah, I'll be home later, promise, but never did. I mean, as an adult, I couldn't go out and chase him, see where he was and trail him home like much as I would love to. And every Monday morning, he would dander in at 4 or 5 in the morning, shout into me, Mum, that's me home, love you, see you in the morning. And I would just say to him, Lee, where have you been, son? Oh, I've just been at such and such a house or whatever. And I would go out and I would look at him. I said, looking at you, your eyes are hanging. And he says, he looked like a homeless person. He really, because he clearly hadn't washed or anything all weekend. For 2 or 3 days, while he was on the drugs, he wouldn't eat a bite. Not a single bite would go through over his mouth. And then he would binge eat. And this is when, after he had his sleep and had come down, and then he would start to eat everything in sight. And that was the cycle of him eating, not eating, coming in with the drugs. And I just knew every weekend this was going to happen. And I had said to him, I says, Lee, some of these days I'm going to get a knock at the door. And the police are going to be standing there telling me you're dead. And I says, I couldn't cope with that, and you know that. And he says, no, it's all right. He says, I'm not that bad. But at that time, Mephedrone was a big thing. So that was his next protocol. And diazepam. That was a massive thing as well. I actually drug tested him. I sent away for drug testing kits online. And he willingly allowed me to drug test him, and they always came positive. But of course it was, and I'm really sorry, I shouldn't be doing this, I promise not to do it again. And that was just, things started coming. I said, Lee, I don't even know what to believe anymore. I said, you're constantly lying to me. I don't know when you're telling me the truth or if you're even telling me the truth anymore. Because he was telling me he was going one place, but he would end up at another. People used to say to me, you know, Lee was at such and such a party, and my God, you want to see the state of him? He was in a really bad way. I actually heard him one point, one night he was at a party, and he collapsed and he was foaming from the mouth, and they threw him out into the garden because they didn't want the police to come to their house. And 2 of his very good friends took him into a car and were going to take him to the hospital, but he begged them not to take him to the hospital, that he'd be okay. And I've heard that happen to a number of people actually, it's not just Lee. So yeah, towards about the last 6-8 months before he died, it was just getting worse and worse. Drug taking was horrific. Still coming in, as soon as he came in, the shoulders would go down, the head would go down, and he was just so unhappy. And it was like he was exhausted with having to put this big facade on for everybody outside, because Lee was always smiling and he was always happy, and everybody used to say he's such a great fella, like no matter who he met, like he left an impression on. And I used to think, God, if only you knew what he was going through. So I was getting to the point that weekend, whenever he did take his own life, he was in amazing mood. He was in an amazing form. He just came in, bouncing in from work, and I'm going to such and such's, and we're just going to do this, that and the other. And I says, no drugs, Lee, please, no drugs. And he says, no, I haven't been on them for a few weeks. He says, I feel great. And I'm like thinking, no, you have been on them. I know you've been on them. In fact, I found drugs in, well, I heard him one night in the bedroom cutting up. I knew what he was doing, like, and I went in and he had the line of cocaine sitting ready to sniff it. I says, Lee, not in the house, son. I says, I do not want that stuff in my house. So that weekend he came in bouncing about. Apparently he'd been to loads of different people's houses, partying. People said to me he was turning up randomly at their doors, like, hi, you come for a coffee? And he was just hyper. He was completely and utterly hyper, and more hyper than what he usually be. And he come in the early hours of the Monday morning. At 5 o'clock in the morning, he was due to start work on Monday morning at 7. But he came in and I says, Lee, he came in to me and he was just again completely wiped out. His jaw was going, his speech was slurred. It's probably one of the worst times I'd actually seen him. Hadn't got a clue where he had been all weekend or what he had done or who he'd even spoke to, not a clue. And I says, Lee, give me your car keys, son. I says, you will not be going to work in the morning in that state. And I took his car key off him and I says, just go to bed. And I says, I'll see you in the tomorrow morning or afternoon when you're up and we'll have a wee chat. It's what I always said every time. I says, come on, we'll sit and talk about it. But when you're sitting talking to Lee, you could see he was looking at you, but he really wasn't taking it in. It was just going over his head. By that point, he didn't care about anybody. He really didn't. He didn't care about me. He didn't care about himself. He didn't care about his family. All he cared about was where he was getting his next fix. Was never cheeky. Was never angry. Was never, stamping around, shouting and screaming. That was not Lee. He was always very polite and very gracious and everything. He got up at lunchtime on the Monday. I says he was hungry. He went and made himself something to eat. He says, I'm just going to go back to bed and lie down. He says, for work in the morning. I says, okay. Come down the stairs at 8 o'clock on that Monday night and asked me for his car key because he needed to get his headphones out of the car. So I gave him the key. He came back in and I never took the key back off him. That'll haunt me for the rest of my days because he went to bed and I also went to bed at the same time at 8 o'clock that night because I was tired. I hadn't slept all weekend worrying about him. And the next thing I knew, my door was knocking. It was the police. I run downstairs. I says, what's wrong? In fact, my initial thoughts were, what has he done? And the policeman said, I'm afraid we have to tell you. He says, your son Lee Barry's car has been involved in a very, very serious road traffic accident. And I says, well, no, Lee's in bed. And I ran up the stairs and clearly Lee wasn't in bed. And I come back down again and I seen his car was gone and I just knew. I said to the policeman, well, where is he now? Where did the accident happen? And they says, well, we can't tell you any of that because we don't know. We've literally been just told to come to your house. And I just sat in complete shock. But I was hoping against hope that he'd be alive somewhere that he was, he was going to pull through this, that this was going to be his wake-up call. And I went back up into his room and then I seen a suicide note. So I knew then that he had left the house with the intention of killing himself. Obviously, again, I just thought, God, no, he has to be still alive. So we had my friend, one of my best friends come up, and one of Lee's best friends come over, and we get into her car to go to the hospital. And the journey the whole way up, I kept saying to them, he's going to be dead, and no, he's dead. And they kept saying, no, don't think like that, it'll be fine, don't worry about it. We'll go up there and everything will be okay. And we went into the hospital, and I said to the nurse about Lee Barry, and she says, yeah, come in through these doors. She says, go into the family room, and I just knew. I said, no, if I go into that family room, somebody's going to come and tell me my Lee's dead. But eventually, we went into the family room, and it just seemed like hours and hours went past. And the nurse came in and she said, had Lee any distinguishing marks on him? At this point, we still hadn't identified it was Lee, but I knew, obviously, it must have been. And I says, yeah, loads and loads of tattoos. She says, could you describe one of them? Well, none of the three of us could think. And I kept thinking, I can't even think one tattoo Lee has, what it is. None of us could think. And then she said, did he have a Marvel tattoo on his leg? And I says, yes. And she says, I'm so sorry. She says, it is Lee and he hasn't made it. My family then come in. I have to tell them that Lee hadn't made the accident. He had taken his own life. My mum come walking into the hospital wearing pyjamas and her dressing gown and her wee slippers on. Because whenever my sister went to tell her what had happened, she was just get me into the car and get me up to him. So my sister and my brother had to go and identify him, and it was Lee. And next thing was the nurses, they were going to clean him up a bit and get him into the wee quiet room next to where you were sitting for me to see him. Walking into that room and seeing your son. Lying cold. And not a mark on him, considering how bad the accident was. He drove into a wall, come down the Mephedrone, it must have been at really high speed. Right into a wall. He had no seatbelt on. He was slumped over the steering wheel. The airbags had come out, but he never had one single mark on his face. Even the nurse said to me, she says, my God, he's such a handsome young boy. And I just kept looking at him, thinking he's sleeping. And I said to my friend, it's okay, he'll wake up in a minute, we'll take him home. But it was obviously the shock of everything. I was convinced that he was just going to wake up and come walking out of that hospital with me. So that I sat with him for about 2.5 hours. It was hard to take in. I was handed a bag of clothes that he had on him. And had to come home without him. And when I got down into the house, I opened the bag they gave me. This is training shoes, a pair of shorts, a t-shirt and a pair of boxers. All have been cut off and full of blood. I just thought, my God, what has he done? And of course you wonder, did he get, was he feeling any pain, or was it instant? I just didn't know anything. I just sat with him, closing my hand, just smelling him, because I could still smell the smell of him. And then they brought him home next day. Yeah, brought him home in a coffin. I sat with him for the whole time he was at home in the coffin. I didn't leave his side. I sat and held his hand. And then I just kept saying to everybody that come up into my house, all his friends, I says, this is the reality of what you're doing. Why would you put anybody through this? You know, I says, you just need to know. I says, the consequences of what you're doing. I says, not only to yourselves, but to your family. And that was that, really. It was just, had to get over the funeral, and never thought in a million years I would ever bury my son. And especially not that way. Never in a million years did I think he would take his own life. Nobody ever did. Every one of his friends says no. That just was not one thing that they would have thought Lee would have ever done. And that's the consequences of taking drugs and mental health and having no help and not knowing where to go for help. And then everywhere we did go, the doors were banged in our faces. And it's still like that now. There's not enough help. Or if there is help, people don't know about it. And they need to know. He was my only son, I'm my only child. So, yeah. But I've had a really good support network, and my best friends have been just amazing. I actually don't think I'd be here today if it wasn't for them. It's my first words to my friend when she was with me in that hospital. I says, that's it, I'm done. I can't live without him. I says, I'm going to the grave with him. But here I am, because I'm determined. I'm going to, even if I help one person, make people aware that there is help out there. It's just finding, and we need to make it easier for them to find the help that they need. These referrals from doctors that have to wait for 6 or 8 weeks for counselling, and it's not the way it should be. There are people out there that can help them pretty much immediately, but they just don't know how to access them. And this is the big thing for me. And had I known now what I knew then, Lee would be still alive, because I know the help's out there. And I mean, I myself, I have Extern with me, and they have been just amazing. They really are such an amazing help for me. My doctor, and I have a fabulous mental health team around me. And there is the help out there, but people just don't know how to. But it's the fact that the drugs are so normalised, so easy to get, so cheap. But yet, kids aren't being educated, I think, until it's too late. A few years ago, I found that, Lee was involved with a couple of ones taking drugs, and I went to their parents and I told them, and they just buried their head in the sand. It was like, oh, no, they don't do that. And that's often what I find. A lot of parents don't want to accept that their children are possibly on drugs. Or if they are, it's not that bad, I don't think they've got a real big problem. But trying to convince them that that's okay at the minute, but eventually they will have a real big problem on their hands. And like I keep telling them, I said, look for the signs, look for the change in the way they are, from their personality to their hygiene, to are they eating Are they going out for like days on end? How are they when they're coming in the house? Because you can notice the difference. It's not like you can't notice it. You do notice it's massive. The difference is massive, and the change in the personality, the fact that they've all of a sudden don't seem to care about anything or anybody but themselves, and they need to address it. And I've heard so many people saying to me, "But they won't go to the doctor." I know they won't go to the doctor, or but they get really angry with me and they start shouting at me, and I says, "Well, you need to be stronger, and you need to be firmer." You know, at the end of the day, do you want your child to be lying in the coffin and holding his hand for 3 days the way I had to? I said, you need to get something done, you need to do it. Stop shying away from it. For as long as they shy away from it, their kids are staying on it, they're not going nowhere. And I intend to go as far as I can go, as in getting a meeting with the mental health minister for Northern Ireland, who I never even thought existed, didn't know anything about. But I've been in contact with an MP who's a friend of mine, and a friend of a friend, and I've asked him, what do? I need something done, and we need it now. But there's no point them saying they're pumping money into this, that and the other. Where is the money? Where's it going? Where's the help? Where's the difference from this time till 10 years ago? Is there going to be any change from today and 10 years' time? Of course there's not. If they're going to pump money into it, at least do something with it. You know, my idea was, like, everywhere should have a safe place for them to go. If you're sitting with your child at 3 o'clock in the morning, they're saying, I'm going to commit suicide. Oh, sorry son, but you better wait 5 hours till the doctor's opens. They need something there and then. A phone call's not going to do it. To Lifeline or their smarts and anything else. You need to physically have somewhere to take them, like a safe place. And there's me and a friend of mine who's a counsellor, and we talked about it, and she says, even somewhere in the town where the mother and the child, or whoever, the child on their own, can come down in and sit with nurses or counsellors or mental health people that's going to be there 24/7, needs to be on 24/7, and they can come in. It's like a wee home environment, and they can either sit and talk to somebody, or just sit on a sofa and read a book, or just sit and cry, or somewhere that's safe, that they are going to be safe until they can get help. And that's not happening. This waiting for this, that and the other is not good enough. So it's not, absolutely not good enough. Go with your instincts and go with your gut. You're a mother or a father at the end of the day. You know your own child. You know, or you should at least know where they are every night. If they're, I'm not saying everybody's the same, but if they're on about in big groups, you know, do you know what they're actually doing? And to be honest, I searched it. I went through his room regularly. I found stuff that I didn't want to find. Do it. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, it's your child's life that we're talking about here. This isn't a practice run, this is reality. You need to be involved and need to know their every move, and I know that's not the way you want to be with your child, to have to nearly track them everywhere they go. But if you feel in your gut that there's something wrong, well then you can nearly guarantee it's right. There is something wrong, you need to follow it. I'm not blaming anybody for Lee's death, absolutely not. Lee chose to take drugs. That was all his decision. Nobody forced him down him. Definitely didn't. But I just think, when I look at some of his friends who have settled down, they're married, they've got children, and I think that should have been Lee. You know, that really should have been Lee, and there was nothing stopping Lee being like that, but he was always drawn to the other side for some reason. And I think for for Lee with his mental health, he didn't think he was good enough for anybody. I think he thought that being off his head and drunk drugs all the time was just what he was good enough for. He wasn't good enough for anything else. He had very, very low self-esteem. And I don't know where that came from, because he was always, always well supported. He couldn't have come from a better, more loving family. And although I was a single parent, my mum and dad absolutely adored Lee. So they did. So yeah, I mean, just go with your gut instinct. If you think your child's taking drugs, ask them. You know, that's it. Be forward. Are you taking drugs? Do you know the consequences of what will happen if you take drugs? Stand up and just say, no, I don't want it anymore. I know there are ones out there who are involved in a crowd and too frightened to walk away and leave it because they think they'll have no friends left. They used to say to me, he says, but they're my mates. I says, Lee, they're not, son. And I think there is kids among these groups that probably are thinking, I don't want to do this, but if I don't do this, they're going to, you know, think that I'm weak. Or you're not weak, you're very brave. If you can stand up in a crowd and just say, no, I do not want this lifestyle anymore, I'm gone. You're the brave one, not them. Just say no.